Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Aberna. I want to welcome you back. I welcome myself back, actually. I'm feeling better. Had a cough for a while that I couldn't get rid of, so it didn't make sense to do much recording. So I apologize for the time between some of the last recordings and this one. This is another short recording, another short discussion, I guess, or not really a discussion because you're not talking with me, but a short video to share some things with you. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I guess it's helpful to me to kind of make that clarity in my own mind as to what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it. And so I'm sharing that process with you as well, and hopefully it will make some difference to you as to your understanding of where I'm coming from and the things that are going through my mind. This particular one came about because someone asked me how I came to the conclusions about the truths of who Jesus was and who Paul was and all of that, when the only information I have to go on are the Christian writings of the Gospels and epistles that I acknowledge were so corrupted. And so here's the logic. Here's the logic that I will share with you. So I begin with an assumption. And there are many references in second century writings regarding the beliefs of the Nazarene movement after Jesus. These were the true disciples, the true followers of Jesus, Yeshua, his brothers, and also his disciples. The common consensus in these writings seems to be that Jesus was completely Torah observant, that he was completely human, born of Joseph and Mary with other brothers. But it was also believed, indeed, that he was the Messiah, that he would be returning to finish the job since it wasn't finished when he left. Since it is logical to believe that those who knew Jesus and lived with him should know him best, so I set this information as a foundation. Again, do I have solid proof that this is what the Nazarenes believed, that the followers? No, I don't. I'm just, none of us have that exact proof. We don't have a document that lays this out that has been provable or proven. So at any rate, that's where the foundation is. So I set this information first. Now, as I read the Christian writings of the Gospels and Acts and the epistles, I have to believe that what doesn't fit that foundation was added or corrupted. So with that assumption, and why do I believe it was possible that it was added or corrupted? I add to that assumption the knowledge that Constantine in the 4th century, his goal, his very clear goal, not a hidden one, his very clear goal was to paint a very negative picture of Judaism and a very positive picture of Rome. And that it's also possible that some of his work had been done for him before his time by the Flavian empires, who Josephus, from whom we get a lot of our history, owed his allegiance to a century before. So that coloring had already begun. So from this point, I sift through the writings of the Gospels and look for connections to other writings from that time period, like that of Hillel, other Jewish writings, Hillel and Shammai, and the historical understanding of what was happening with the Sadducees during the 1st century. So now, in my mind, then, I have a template to help me determine the core message that I can find, that I can see of Jesus, Yeshua, and that message, very clearly to me, is one of repentance, similar to John the Baptizer's message, and the importance of righteousness and moral purity. Now, what could be more Jewish than that? It's very likely, because of the similarities in teachings, that Jesus was a follower of the Hillel school of Pharisees. Again, no proof. It's also possible he was an Essene, or at least a follower of the Essenes. And he might also have been, there's been some very interesting works, that he was a zealot. Even though that has been covered up and glossed over, there are some evidences that he would have belonged to that group of people and that philosophy. I tend to lean towards the fact that he was more a follower of Hillel and the school of the Pharisees than anything else. But again, There's no solid proof one way or the other. So if I read the teachings of Yeshua with this filter, I would then give far more weight to his teachings in support of Torah observance and the teachings of the Hillel Pharisees. And I also know from historical records that both the Pharisees, as well as the Nazarene movement, acted before Paul, this is very important, acted before Paul, Shaul, to establish Jewish and Gentile groups in cities outside Jerusalem. These groups did not separate themselves from their Jewish brethren, but worshiped in synagogues alongside them. These were Gentile believers, but not converts necessarily. Converts wouldn't have been called righteous Gentiles, or wouldn't have been called, the God-fearers. Those were the Gentiles who didn't convert, but they did follow the Noahide laws. And again, they worshiped, it is very important, they worshiped without any trouble at all in synagogues alongside Jews in those places of study and worship. Now, this wouldn't have been allowed if the followers of the rabbi from Nazareth taught the abolition of the laws of Moses. They wouldn't have been allowed in, as happened later. Certainly, there was criticism of the stringency of these laws from the followers of Yeshua. There was definitely criticism, but remember, please, that criticism was one that you could find in other Jewish writings of that time, and even could be leveled today, that there is little effort to help the simple Jews, the ones who don't live their entire lives studying Torah, to follow the mitzvahs and stringent rabbinic traditions. This is a problem. It was a problem then, and it's a problem today. From what we know of the schools of Hillel and Shammai, Jesus, Yeshua, could very well have been echoing the teachings of the students of Hillel against Shammai in this. Now, the huge problem is that we only have a record of a 3-year ministry, and that just seems so unlikely. It doesn't seem possible at all that any rabbi could have attracted the numbers and intensity of followers that Jesus, Yeshua, seemed to do in the 3 years' time that he supposedly had his ministry. So now I have to ask another question. Why do we know nothing about his life prior to the Gospels, other than some apocryphal works that, again, probably contain some manner of truth, but it's not a recording and understanding of his life. Now, and we don't have a lot of information about anyone from that first century. Any of the even Hillel, we have limited information, but we do have some. But I think in more modern terms of a great Italian rabbi, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He also died at an early age, 39, lived just a few years longer than supposedly Jesus, Yeshua, did. And we know of his, Luzzatto's, many accomplishments as a youth. And so perhaps I imagine Jesus, Yeshua, was the same way. If there's a gap, it was an intentional one. The Sadducees, and this I'm not putting this on the Romans as much as I'm putting this on the hierarchy of Judaism, of the Jews in that first century. The Sadducees carried great political power, and if they chose to, again, I don't know, if they chose to, I can imagine they could easily find a way to destroy any extant teachings of someone they regarded as a threat. If not them, certainly later the Flavians had such power, and they ruled from 69 to 79 of the Common Era, about the same time we're told the first gospel was written, so supposedly in Greek. Is that a coincidence? Perhaps not. First of all, as I've said before, the followers of the rabbi from Nazareth would absolutely not have written the words of their master in Greek. Come on, this should not be rocket science here. If this rabbi really was as powerful as his followers believed, to the point that they were willing to die for him, then it is not out of the realm of possibility that there was a concern well, first of all, it's not out of the realm of possibility that there was writings, that they did write down things that their master taught them, that their rabbi taught them. But additionally, then there's certainly a possibility that there was a concerted effort, perhaps a combined effort of the Sadducees, the Flavians, and even possibly the Shammai school to discredit and destroy any record of his teachings. Okay, conspiracy theories abound here, but still, there's some logic, I think, that you can see in this. Certainly, I can see that. So that raises the next question. Aside from the danger implicit in a messianic pretender to Rome, was there another danger that was even more concerning, even after this man's death, Jesus, Yeshua, even after his death to Rome? Okay, why would Rome care at this point if they had taken care of the head of the snake and gotten rid of him? So the answer to that also seems pretty obvious to me, and that is the other danger that we see is their success. And again, this is before Paul and Shaul, but their success, not Paul and Shaul, Paul, Shaul, but it's their success in reaching out to Gentiles. And again, Judaism had been doing this for a while. There were already established righteous Gentiles in the Roman Empire, even before this time. But it seems to be that this Nazarene movement had a great influence on the numbers of these righteous Gentiles and that particular movement. Again, it was a Jewish movement. It was not a Christian movement. It was a Jewish movement. So their Noahide movement seems to have been very powerful, which would have been a threat to the Flavians, certainly would have been a threat to, at this point, after 70, the Sadducees' power was pretty much abolished after the temple was destroyed. But certainly it would have been a continued threat to the Flavians, to the Roman Empire, and so they would have wanted to deal with that threat. And that brings us then to Paul, Shaul. And it seems clear to me that Jesus, Yeshua, was not the person the 2nd and 3rd century church leaders made him out to be. So that's the bottom line here. He was a Torah observant Jew who may or may not have wanted to be proclaimed as the Messiah. I don't know. We have statements in the Gospels. Were they really from him? And even so, those statements don't permeate the Gospels. They appear from time to time. But again, I think about the modern example today, and that is of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Certainly his followers, some of his followers, maybe all of them at one point, believed him to be the Messiah. But he himself never clearly proclaimed it as such. For some Lubavitchers, there is a belief that he died decades ago, but there are Lubavitchers who believe that he will return and prove himself to be the Messiah. So even they understand that the messianic role has to be fulfilled before the claimant can take the title of Messiah. Didn't happen for Jesus, didn't happen for the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Is he coming back? Is Jesus coming back? The followers of the Nazarene certainly believe the same thing. But the issue, and historically we can see how this issue plays out, the longer they waited, the harder it was for them to keep the faith. And the harder it was for them to keep the faith, the harder it was for them to have control. And I think that's a main reason why Constantine was able to do what he was able to do, because at this point, 300 years later, 200 some years later, the faith of the Nazarenes had waned because the Messiah had not come back. So the question, I wonder, should the Messiah tarry? I hope he doesn't. Should the Messiah tarry? I wonder how many years will have to pass before the Lubavitchers will have to face the same difficult truth. Again, I don't know, but there's definitely a connection that we can see very clearly between the two. It's also, to me, in understanding, Well, I don't want to go there now. So again, getting back to Paul, who's arguably the true founder of Constantine's church, could he have assumed such power if the faith of the Nazarenes hadn't weakened? But here again, I have to wonder if the Paul we see in the epistles and in Acts is the real man or one fabricated by Constantine to establish the final removal of the Jewish Jesus from his church, because that is what Paul did. But the writings of Paul range from 48 to 64 CE, so it may be harder, but not impossible, to blame either the Flavians before Constantine or Constantine himself for completely rewriting them. Either way, it does seem possible that only some slight revisions would be necessary to remake Paul in the Flavian's image and then ultimately Constantine's. All that would be necessary is to hide or bury the fact that Paul wrote almost exclusively to Gentiles, to Noahides. If we look at him in that light, with that understanding, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the things that he said in regards to complaining about those who wanted to follow the law. It's completely in line with Jewish halakha that not only should Gentile believers not try to follow the law, in some cases they should be forbidden under penalty of death from doing so. So with that slight twist of understanding, it makes even the writings of Paul acceptable to Judaism. But I admit that my defense of Paul is not as certain as my defense of Jesus, especially given the writings we have of the Nazarene movement that call Paul a heretic. Now, Paul may have been himself an agent, no solid proof here, only conjecture, of the Sadducees or the Shammai school of Pharisees to discredit this movement. That may have been his purpose, and to discredit them with his blasphemies. It is, after all, Paul who makes the most solid arguments of Jesus as God. Okay, not, of course, the Gospel of John also, but that's a later writing. So, but at the time of the writing of Paul, he was the one that made the most solid arguments of Jesus as God. So that may have been his personal delusion. Again, there's no proof one way or the other. What is clear, however, is that we know from the epistles and writings of Luke that Paul was considered a missionary to the Gentiles. This is acknowledged. It's not a hidden fact. And if we truly acknowledge that, we can at least understand that the bulk of his teachings against the law for all believers, was probably misunderstood. His 2 trips to Jerusalem would seem to confirm that, at least, because the Nazarenes did not at first seem, at least as far as we know from the writings, they didn't at first condemn his teachings to these Gentiles. They just wanted him to show, and if you read in Acts 15 and where he went to the Jerusalem Council, I think this becomes pretty clear. They just wanted him to show that he was not saying these things to Jews or Jewish converts, that he was not in any way deprecating the law with regards to Jews and Jewish converts. I think that's what the council required and what we see and what he agreed to, at least at the beginning, at least as far as we know. So, beginning with these, beginning with these possibilities, it's not a huge leap to imagine a powerful conspiracy among various players to completely distort the teachings of Jesus and possibly Paul for a variety of religious and political reasons. What remained in the Gospels were stories that were so entrenched already among the people that to completely eliminate them would be too difficult. And so some truths were kept. And we know this is how evil often works. It doesn't completely make up absurd ideas and things. It includes kernels of truth within it. All right, so these are admittedly my fantasies, but I see them as no more absurd than believing that there were no writings about Jesus in Hebrew or Aramaic, or that someone who ended up influencing hundreds and possibly thousands of people as their rabbi from Nazareth did or could do so in 3 years of public ministry, or that a decade or so later, someone completely removed from the followers of this rabbi could then come in and take over control, absolute control of his mission and teachings. Or that the president of the Sanhedrin, Gamaliel, the greatest spiritual leader of his time, who is the grandson of Hillel, Hillel arguably restored Torah learning and law to first century Israel. It is just inconceivable that he would support this man's followers, as again, we only have this in the book of Acts, but it appears as though he supported this man's followers. That wouldn't happen if they weren't more than they appear to us. So, believe it or not. So that's, again, some of my musings, some of my thought patterns, and in the things that I'm sharing here, the things that I want to try and convey, at least to open the door, and the importance of that. And when we get to, and this will happen soon, the book Israel and Humanity by Rabbi Eliyahu Ben Amozeg, and I'm very excited to share that with you. We're going to see that there is a very powerful rabbinic scholar from the 19th century who will give a lot more information in this regard and say a lot of the same things. So again, very excited to share that with you. But for now, these are my opinions, my thoughts. I don't claim to have any authority from, certainly I have no authority, no rabbinic authority, and I have the only authority I have from God is in my own mind. I just share the things that I believe. Hopefully you'll find some use in listening to them. All right, so again, thank you for sharing your time with me. Thank you for being a part of Yeshiva B'nai Noach and supporting it. I would like to extend my invitation that you continue. If you like what you see, share it. Let others know about it. Not everyone. This isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, and I understand that. But again, I look forward to the possibility you might leave comments, but please make those comments respectful. Even if you have constructive criticism, I don't mind that. But I just ask that you not make negative references either to anyone's religion or anyone's beliefs, but allow each of us to have our own viewpoints and the places that we go to. Okay, so again, thank you for your time. Shalom.